Chapter 1. The Envelope Without a Stamp. The envelope arrived in the dead of night. Trevor Lennox found it slipped under the door of his motel room, its surface damp with condensation from the mountain air. No return address, no postage. Just his name, handwritten in neat, looping script that looked practiced, like someone had studied his name 1,000 times before writing it once. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he placed it on the table beside his half-drunk coffee, lit by the dull glow of a flickering bedside lamp. Outside, the wind rustled through the pines. A train howled somewhere in the distance, too far to hear, too close to ignore. Trevor stared at the envelope like it might move. Then he opened it. Inside, one sheet of aged paper and a thin, worn topographic map folded crisply in thirds. The map showed the southern fringe of the Canadian Rockies, just above the border. Hand-drawn symbols, spirals, triangles, forked lines had been inked across the margins. And on the back, in the same looping script, 5 words. "They sleep here, still breathing." Trevor unfolded the paper. It wasn't typed. It wasn't even ink. It looked burned, like the letters had been scorched into the page. "You've followed signals. You've heard the tones, but you've only seen what they allowed. This isn't the sky, Mr. Lennox. This is below." No signature, no sender. Trevor sat back, map in one hand, the burned page in the other. He'd seen a lot in his time. Unexplainable lights, missing time, glyphs that vibrated under UV. But this felt different. Older, not alien in origin, but ancient in residence. As if whatever this was had always been here. He circled the marked cave on the map. The notation beside it was simple. Entry sealed 1961, bones still warm. He folded the map, reached for his recorder, and pressed the red button. His voice, calm but distant. New case, no client, no confirmation, but something is calling. Outside, the wind picked up, and beneath it, low and quiet, a sound he hadn't heard in years. A hiss, long and steady, like breath against stone. Chapter 2. The Disappeared Professor. Professor Elijah Brandt had vanished without setting off a single alarm. No missing persons report, no media coverage, not even a worried statement from his university. Just a closed faculty page and a few murmurs on forgotten forums, academic whispers buried under routine. But Trevor remembered the name. Brandt had once published a paper that caught his attention. Non-human symmetry in pre-glacial architecture. It had been retracted within weeks. Now his name was on the map. Scribbled in the corner in the same looping handwriting. Follow Brandt's last descent. Trevor drove south the next morning, toward a jagged stretch of wilderness along the British Columbia-Alberta border. Brandt had supposedly been researching Ice Age migration patterns, but word among fringe circles was that he had gone looking for something else. A set of undocumented cave systems hinted at in old oil survey maps and indigenous oral traditions. Trevor arrived in a near-abandoned ranger station near Crow's Nest Pass. The windows were boarded, and the logbook hadn't been updated in over a year. But the trailhead still existed, faint, overgrown, winding through pine-stained rock and shadow. After an hour on foot, he found it. A crevice in the cliff face, easily missed. No signage, no markers. Just a faint glyph carved into the rock at eye level. A spiral, not rounded, angular, geometric, reptilian. Trevor knelt to examine it. The groove was too deep for casual vandalism. The edges were glassy, melted, burned with precision. And there, in the dirt beside the entrance, half buried beneath loose stone, a weathered journal. Its pages were warped from moisture, but legible. On the inside cover, a name written in pencil, Elijah Brandt. Trevor turned to the final entry. "This is not metaphor. The scales are not symbol, they are structure. I am entering now. If I do not return, let them know. The myth never died. It just went underground. Trevor closed the book. The cave yawned before him, black, ancient, exhaling cold breath from somewhere far below. He clicked on his headlamp and stepped inside. Chapter 3. The Rock That Breathes. The air changed as soon as Trevor crossed the threshold. The mouth of the cave was narrow and jagged, but just beyond, the passage widened into an eerie stillness. No sound from the outside world followed him in. Not the wind, not the birds, not even the echo of his own breath. It was like stepping into the lungs of the earth and realizing they were holding their breath. His headlamp cut a pale tunnel through the dark, illuminating only a few feet ahead at a time. The walls were rough and stratified, etched with marks both natural and not. He could make out claw-like grooves, spirals carved too deeply, a smoothness in places where rock shouldn't be smooth. After 20 minutes of descent, the temperature began to rise. Not like geothermal heat. This was something else. Intentional warmth. Trevor slowed as he approached a natural chamber, tall, silent, wide enough to fit a train car. At the far end, the stone wall was smooth, almost metallic in color. It shimmered faintly under his light, like it was absorbing the beam rather than reflecting it. He stepped closer, then stopped. The wall was pulsing, ever so gently, rising and falling with an invisible rhythm. Breathing. Trevor knelt and pressed the back of his hand to the surface. It was warm. Not hot, not humid, just warm, like the inside of a living body. He stepped back, stunned, then noticed it. A single mark in the dust at his feet. A three-toed footprint. Wide. Deep. Not recent, but not old either. His hand moved to the recorder on his chest. Entry log, Day 1. Subterranean chamber found beneath BC-Alberta border. Structural anomaly detected. Possible biomimetic surface or living tissue. No signs of Brandt. Yet. A faint rumble passed through the floor. Trevor turned off the lamp, stood still in the dark, and listened. No rockfall, no tectonics, just a low, steady sound from deep below. A hiss, long and slow, like something ancient had just exhaled. Chapter 4. Symbols Older Than Language. Trevor moved deeper. The warmth of the chamber gave way to a dry stillness, like walking into the ruins of a cathedral no one had visited in thousands of years. His flashlight caught jagged arches in the rock, clearly shaped, not formed. Some were smoothed into serpentine curves, others tapered into spined ridges that curled like fossilized horns. Then came the symbols. At first, they were faint, patterns etched into the walls just above eye level. Geometric spirals, diamond interlocks, split triangles, all too deliberate to be erosion. Some glowed faintly under the beam of his flashlight, as if something in the mineral had been activated by light itself. He stopped in front of a particularly complex pattern, a double spiral, encircled by repeating triangles with forked tails. Symbols he'd seen once before in a classified briefing long buried in a government black site archive. Those documents had linked them to both ancient Mesoamerican glyphs and pre-dynastic African cave markings. But that wasn't what made his breath catch. Beneath the spiral, in low relief, was a shape unmistakable to Trevor, a crescent moon, touching the earth. It wasn't a planet. It was an eye, watching, and beneath it, a single phrase, inscribed in a language Trevor couldn't read, but somehow understood. The blood remembers what the mind forgets. He traced the curve with his fingers. The stone was unnaturally smooth, like it had been burned into form rather than carved. Deeper in the chamber, the symbols became denser. Walls covered in spirals within spirals. Murals of scaled figures kneeling around circular platforms. One mural showed a tall figure reaching into the chest of a human, drawing out a coil of light. Trevor backed away. He wasn't just inside a cave. This was a record, a temple, or worse, a blueprint. Chapter 5. The Hall of Origin. The tunnel narrowed, then opened again, into something that didn't feel like a cave. Trevor stepped cautiously into a chamber that echoed nothing. The acoustics were wrong, absorbing sound rather than reflecting it. He paused, holding his breath, flashlight scanning across smooth stone walls and polished floors. There were no carvings here, no symbols, only mirrors. Dozens of tall, impossibly pristine panels lined both sides of the corridor. Some were fractured, others intact. None were dusty. Each one shimmered faintly in the beam of his light, and none reflected him the way a normal mirror should. He stepped closer. In the first panel, he saw his own face. But it didn't move. It watched. The reflection held itself half a second too long, blinking after he had, like it was trying to learn the rhythm of being human. In the second mirror, he wasn't there at all. Just the chamber, the light, and a faint silhouette of something tall and lean with elongated limbs and eyes too far apart. He checked the others. Each mirror showed a variation, some grotesque, others elegant. One showed a reptilian form draped in gold, standing among beings in ceremonial robes. Another showed what looked like himself, kneeling before a monolithic structure shaped like an inverted eye. Then, the last mirror. It was blank, until he touched it. The surface flickered, like water catching flame, and then it cleared, revealing not a reflection, but a memory. Trevor stood frozen. It showed a young boy, himself, in the backyard of his childhood home, looking up, smiling. Then, a flash of light, a figure behind him, and a voice, not in words, but in geometry. Spirals, triangles, the same language as the cave wall. He stumbled back. The mirror went black. His recorder turned on in his coat pocket. Not by touch, not by accident. Subject 17. Recognition achieved. Signal latent. Directive intact. Trevor froze. No one else was in the room, but something was listening. And now it knew he was awake. Chapter 6. The Cold Ones Speak in Geometry. Trevor left the mirror hall in silence. He didn't speak. He didn't think. The air felt dense now, not from humidity, but from meaning, like the stone itself was pressing inward, waiting for him to make the next move. The tunnel narrowed into a passage that curved down like a spiral, wrapping into itself. Every 20 steps he passed a panel, not mirrors this time, but stone inlays embedded with faint glowing lines. Geometric shapes looped and unfolded across the surfaces. Triangles within triangles, spirals intersecting with perfect angles. It looked like art, but it felt like language. Not words, not pictures, something between. Trevor paused at one of the panels. The lines shifted under his gaze. Not animated, but reactive. His presence seemed to activate a sequence. One spiral blinked, then unfurled outward across the surface like a blooming flower made of angles. As it expanded, something pushed against his thoughts. A voice, but not a voice. A structure. He closed his eyes and felt it. A series of impressions. Not sentences, geometries with intention. Welcome, fractal child. You descend along the coil of memory. You are seated with the map, not the message. You are the vessel, not the origin. You are not the first. Trevor's knees buckled. He gripped the wall to steady himself, his mind swimming in heat and static. Something had spoken into the very layout of his mind, not through sound, but through design, a language embedded in shape. He opened his eyes. The glyphs on the wall blinked once more, then faded. He staggered forward through the tunnel, the glow of each panel dimming as he passed, as if acknowledging the transfer had occurred. In his journal he scrawled with a shaking hand, "The cold ones do not speak, they imprint. They are not beings of biology, but of structure, memory by design. And I am not who I thought I was. Far ahead, the corridor widened. Something waited in the dark, not hostile, but ancient. And now it had spoken his shape back to him. Chapter 7. Memory Collapse. Trevor woke up on the floor of his motel room. Light poured in from the window, midday sun slashing through the blinds like a timeline that had snapped. His boots were caked in dust. His clothes were damp with cave sweat, and his journal lay open beside him, pen still gripped in his hand. 2 full pages were covered in sketches and phrases he didn't remember writing. Inverted spiral to unlock. The coils remember the descent. I saw myself from the other side. He sat up slowly. His body ached like he'd been dropped from a height, but there were no bruises, no broken bones. Just a low ringing in his ears and a pressure in the base of his skull. He checked the time. 2 days. Gone. His last voice recording? Corrupted. A dead file. 27 minutes of empty hiss followed by a single second of silence. Then a whisper, barely audible. Echo, not origin. He stumbled to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. In the mirror, he expected to see himself, but for a fraction of a second, he didn't. His pupils were slit. He blinked. Normal. He stared at his reflection for a long time, unsure of what he trusted less, his memory or his body. Back in the main room, his backpack sat zipped and perfectly arranged by the door. He didn't remember packing, didn't remember returning, but inside, nestled between notebooks and survival gear, was the metal fragment, the one from the cave. Except it had changed. Now it was smooth, carved, and bore the same spiral seen on the wall. Trevor placed it on the table and wrote one line. I didn't just see something down there, I brought something back. The lights flickered, and the spiral began to glow. Chapter 8. The Bloodline Directive. Trevor sat at the edge of the motel bed, turning the spiral-marked fragment over in his hand. It felt heavier than before, not physically, historically, as if it now carried something forward from the cave into the waking world. His head still throbbed, his reflection still looked too aware. Then the email came, an anonymous sender. No subject line, just a zip file and a message. You needed to know before they did. It's in your blood. Trevor hesitated, then opened the file on a burner laptop. Inside, digitized scans of lab reports, DNA sequences, blood work dated 3 years ago. His blood work. Tests he didn't remember submitting. Some of it cross-referenced with older samples. Others tagged Brant, Elijah, unresolved. He skimmed the attached annotations. The notes were clinical, stripped of emotion. Anomalous segment detected, unmapped, non-human origin. Repeated in high frequency among recovered fragments near subterranean glyph site. Shared characteristics with reptilian species, classification. Hypothetical, undocumented. Subject shows dormant pattern resembling hybrid directive protocols. Trevor stopped reading. Hybrid. He remembered the phrase from a contact years back. Someone who had claimed they'd infiltrated a secret archive beneath Geneva. They'd said one thing before disappearing. They're not trying to evolve us. They're trying to remember themselves. Through us. Trevor's hand trembled. The report wasn't just scientific. It was structured like a protocol. Directive 9 Theta, listed as inactive, marked beside it, conditionally inherited. Beneath that, one line stood out. Red text, underlined. Subject classified as latent trigger. Spiral encoding confirmed. Trevor closed the file, sat back, stared at the spiral fragment on the table. If the directive was real, if the symbols in the cave weren't just a record of history, but a genetic key, then the story wasn't about contact. It was about continuation, And Trevor Lennox? He wasn't just investigating it anymore. He was part of it. Chapter 9. The Council of Names. Trevor drove 2 hours north, into a flat valley cut by forgotten logging roads and creeping mist. The kind of place people pass through without remembering they did. At the end of a gravel trail was a derelict ranger station, long abandoned. Faded government signage hung limp from a single nail. No power, no signal, but the door was unlocked. Inside, the air was musty with wet paper and neglect. A desk sat at the center of the room, covered in dust, except for one perfectly clean laptop, open and humming. No internet, just one folder. Nomex, Council. Trevor opened it. Inside, a list of names. Dozens. Some he recognized, political figures, media executives, biotech founders. Others were unknown. Each was tagged with a symbol. Most bore a spiral. A few had something else. Scales. He clicked on the first entry. A photo loaded. Grainy, infrared, taken from above. The subject wore a suit, shaking hands at a summit in Geneva. The next image showed the same man, but under thermal imaging, something shifted. Skin temperature irregular, eye shape inconsistent. A thin vertical line visible beneath the jaw. Trevor flipped to another. Same pattern, different figure, different country, each one accompanied by the same coded term. Shell class, directive marked, function, continuity. Then one name stopped him cold. His own. Lennox, T. Latent. Watch only. Possible variant. Host. Trevor stared at the screen. He wasn't just being observed. He was on the list. Another file loaded automatically. A diagram of DNA spiraling alongside a chart of old Mesoamerican glyphs. The header read, Council of Names. Human administrators with trace activation potential beneath it. A note. Some are meant to forget. Others are born to remember. The spiral chooses. Trevor closed the laptop. It shut down instantly. Outside, the trees whispered with a sudden gust. And he realized something chilling. This wasn't conspiracy theory. It was infrastructure. Chapter 10. The Meeting Tree. The coordinates were burned into the final frame of the laptop screen, just before it powered down for good. Trevor followed them into the woods. No trail, no markers. Just moss-thick soil and the hush of pines that had stood longer than memory. He walked for hours. The sun filtered through heavy mist until everything felt suspended, like time had pulled slightly off-center. Then he saw it. A dead tree, massive and alone, in the middle of a clearing shaped like a perfect spiral. The bark had been peeled away in segments, revealing smooth inner rings marked with faint symbols. Glyphs. Familiar ones. Trevor stepped into the center of the spiral, waiting. And from the tree line, something emerged. A man. Tall, draped in a hooded cloak. His face was partially shadowed, but his eyes glinted amber when they caught the light. When he blinked, it was sideways. Reptilian. The figure stopped 10 feet away and raised a hand. Trevor didn't run. He couldn't. The man spoke, not with hostility, but with patience. They said you would come. You carry the resonance. Trevor's voice cracked. What are you? The figure tilted his head. We are continuity. You are disruption made aware. Trevor stepped forward. The directive, the glyphs, the names. What do they want? The figure's gaze deepened. To remember. Through you. Through those who fracture cleanly. You are not the beginning, but you are a bridge. A pause. Then, softer. Not all of us want the cycle to restart. Trevor blinked. Restart? The figure extended a hand. In it, an orb, metallic, spiraled. It pulsed gently. Take this. When the mirror appears again, place it in the reflection. You'll see what you were before." Then, without another word, the figure backed into the mist. Gone. Trevor stood alone with the object. It was warm, faintly alive. The spiral around the tree seemed to breathe. He looked up. No birds, no wind, just the sound of his pulse, and the feeling that something vast and scaled was watching, not from above, but from beneath. Chapter 11. The Reptilian Hypothesis. Trevor didn't return to town. Not yet. He followed the spiral trail out of the clearing, his hands clenched around the orb, now inert. Cool, but pulsing faintly, like it remembered being alive. He hiked until twilight, then made camp along a ridgeline overlooking the valley below. As night fell, he reviewed everything. The mirror, the spiral marks, the fragment that altered itself, the voice that spoke in geometry, and now, the orb, the cloaked being, the phrase, "You are not the beginning, but you are a bridge." Trevor clicked on his recorder, spoke slowly into the silence. Field log, personal. The hypothesis no longer feels like one. The reptilian idea, once dismissed, once mocked, was never about aliens. Not in the way people think. He paused. They're not invaders. They're remnants. Ancient. Integrated. A second lineage hidden in our own. Not underground to hide, but to observe. To pass forward through blood, not memory. He opened his notebook and sketched a rough diagram. 2 spirals converging, intersecting at a third. They seeded their continuation not through technology but through us. Biological encryption. Repeated inheritance. He flipped back to the genetic report. The pattern in his DNA, the spiral helix highlighted. Untranslatable. He whispered, "We weren't made by them. We were made with them." Suddenly the orb flickered. Only once. A single geometric pulse rippled outward from the center. And in that moment, Trevor knew. This wasn't the final artifact. It was an invitation. And if he accepted it, he wouldn't be the same afterward. Chapter 12. The Genetic Key. Trevor returned to the motel before dawn. He hadn't slept, and yet he felt more awake than he had in years. Something in his spine buzzed, not from exhaustion, but from alignment. Like a puzzle piece inside him had shifted into place. The orb sat wrapped in his jacket pocket. He unpacked the laptop again, the blood work still open, the diagrams still glowing faintly. His eyes scanned over the spiral segment, the anomalous helix marker no database could name. Only now he recognized it. It wasn't random. It was a map. Trevor laid out the fragment, the glyph sketches, the orb. Piece by piece, he arranged them according to the triple spiral geometry carved into the tree in the clearing. When placed just right, the orb lit, soft gold lines tracing an invisible circuit through the other artifacts. The laptop chirped. A new folder appeared on screen. Directive Prime X. He clicked. A video began to play. Low resolution. Surveillance quality. A man in a lab coat speaking hurriedly into a camera. The directive is encoded into specific lineages. Not transmitted, not taught, recalled. Once activation occurs, the subject begins reconstruction. Geometric memory returns. The glyphs aren't learned, they're unlocked. He held up a photo. Trevor squinted. It was a childhood picture of him. The scientist continued. Subject 17L, DNA confirmed. Activation triggered via exposure to legacy artifacts. Suggest containment, but recommend observation. This isn't replication, it's inheritance. They are not new. They are returning. The video cut out. Trevor stood frozen in the room. He turned to the mirror, and for just a second, longer than it should have lasted, his reflection blinked sideways. He looked down at his hand. The spiral had appeared faintly beneath the skin on his wrist. Not ink. Structure. And then the orb pulsed again. It was time. Chapter 13. Below the Scales. Trevor stood at the edge of the same clearing where it all began. The spiral etched in the moss was still there. Faint. Dormant. Waiting. In his hand, the orb no longer pulsed. It had cooled, silent and inert. But he knew what it was now. Not a key. A mirror. He stepped into the spiral's center, placed the orb at his feet, and waited. Nothing happened. At first, then the air thickened, like gravity had shifted. The forest sounds fell away. Not silence. Exclusion. Time stopped breathing. The ground beneath him shimmered, and the clearing changed. The trees warped outward, bent by invisible force. The symbols on the bark reformed, no longer glyphs, but instructions. The orb spun slowly in place, floating just above the spiral. Trevor blinked, and the world inverted. He wasn't in the clearing anymore. He was somewhere deep, stone all around, carved in logic, not labor. Hallways shaped by intention, not erosion. In front of him stood the figure again, the reptilian, unhooded this time, eyes calm, older than species. You've come below. Now you see. Trevor nodded. He wasn't afraid. He understood. The truth was never about what's out there, he said. It's about what's buried inside. The figure stepped aside. Behind him, a wall opened. A chamber pulsed with living light. In it, dozens of humans, standing, sleeping, dreaming, each marked with a spiral over the heart. The figure spoke once more. They chose not to remember, but you did. Trevor stepped forward. The orb hovered behind him, then disintegrated. Dust and geometry dissolving into his skin. The glyph beneath his wrist lit once, and for the first time, he saw the pattern. Not from the outside, but from within.